Welcome to Egg Harbor Historical Society's monthly presentations of historical interest. Now on to the program. Dr. Amy Rosebrough is the Wisconsin State Archaeologist in the State Historical Preservation Office of the Wisconsin Historical Society. She's an alumna of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she received her doctorate in 2010 for regional-wide analysis of effigy mounds and mound builders. And her current interest is pretty obvious, and I'm not going to waste your time by talking anymore. And let me please welcome Amy Rosebrough.
Okay, thank you all. Okay. And thank you so much for the opportunity to get back up to Door County, even if it is tourist season. All right. Traffic's a little more dense than the last time I was up here, which was in April. But all right. So the Lost Coastal Community Project is a multi-year project underwritten by the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program and supported by the Wisconsin Historical Society, whom I'm here to represent. We got our start well before COVID, when a family reached out and said, "Can you help us find our ancestors' pier? It's a place called Ronksville, and we can't find it on any map." And we couldn't either. We had, however, read the name before. It appears on an enrollment document for a ship called the Northerner that carried cordwood, and Ronksville was listed as the home port. And at the time, the divers who found that shipwreck had kind of filed it away as, well, that's an odd little mystery, we'll solve that later. And then when the Ronk family descendants came to us, we realized it was time. We had to settle this. So they were looking for this pier. And there's Nicholas and Paul Ronk sitting very nicely on the front of the pier looking at the camera. Built in 1859, operated by the Luxemburger Pier Company, and this kind of was a gas station. Doesn't look much like it, but they were cordwood dealers. They sold cordwood to passing steamships because this is what fueled the boilers, and this is how they made their living. They also used the pier to bring in manufactured goods from Milwaukee, from Port Washington, from Chicago, to supply a tavern and hotel that they owned in Lake Church, just a couple miles inland. So this port was doing double duty. It was an export for lumber products, but also an import area for manufactured goods. And I'm like, okay, that's intriguing. Wonder why it disappeared. And as we're doing the research, try and find anything we can about this community that has just completely vanished, which we did find, by the way, we came across other places that we had never heard of. Nordheim, Yorkville, Amsterdam, and up and down the coast. And realized that there was a huge, huge story that was being overlooked. You'd find a mention here, or a mention there, or maybe it's a place name or a road name. But if you put it all together, it's a massively transformative story. So places like Wilson's Pier, this is near Colarandre State Park now. Gone. What was happening at these little ports changed Wisconsin forever. So this is Wisconsin's vegetation at settlement. So when the Europeans arrived, you can see this green, these coastal forests that are spreading down almost all the way to Chicago. Those forests disappear. So today's land cover. It's farmland now. And this happened in part because of these ports. This was their role, to ship the forest out and bring people in to change the landscape into an agricultural landscape. And it did not take long, within a few decades in a given spot. We know in Door County of over 70 pier complexes, just for this county alone. This is the densest concentration we've found so far. And this map is already out of date. So thanks to research done here, we now know there were multiple piers at Horseshoe Bay. And I'm missing one on the east side up North Bay. They keep popping up in the historic records. The more you read, the more you find. And what are now quiet places, seemingly natural, untouched by humans. You can go there and relax. And you think about it. They used to be incredibly busy little ports with schooners coming and going and lumber and horses and immigrants arriving and steam whistles and bells. All of it vanished with seemingly without a trace. So our project was to see, are there traces left? Beyond the archival record, can we, as archaeologists, maritime and terrestrial, come together and see if we can find bits of these little ports left behind? So tonight I'm going to be talking about 4 in particular, and we'll see the archaeology, and I'll go through the histories of all. I will say that they are all on the other side of this fantastic peninsula because we haven't gotten to Green Bay yet. We've been working our way around. We were supposed to be in Washington Island this year, but with the federal funding freeze, that's been put on hold till next year. And then after that, we hope to continue down and hit Horseshoe Bay and some of our other promising targets on this side of the door. So it starts here. 1840s, 1850. So Ho-Chunk, Menominee, and Anishinaabe, residents of eastern Wisconsin, are forced to sign agreements to move westward. And that opens up Wisconsin's coastline to colonization and settlement. So not all folks left, of course. Many Anishinaabe in particular stuck around. Some found employment in lumber camps. Some continued to live traditional lifestyles, especially fishing on the Lake Michigan side of things. But the dugout canoes that they're paddling are within very short order joined by these, the schooners, Mackinac boats, and steamers, and coming up and down the lake. And they're mostly searching for raw materials and land. In particular, the pineries of the north, so beyond the coastal forest where you get the hardwood for cordwood, you've got the pineries, all that fantastic building material, and then Door County in particular offers stone. Now, colonists and settlers coming in, of course, are focusing on open land, and they start at the south end of the lake where you've got more oak savanna and prairie, and it's just a little easier to move in. But eventually people begin moving north because they're buying some of these parcels sight unseen. They're going to land offices and saying, I want that 40 acres. And then they go see it, and sometimes they were very, very surprised. We have an account of one immigrant from Norway who settles in Kewaunee County, and he bought a tract, 40 acres of pure cedar. And he was appalled. What am I going to do with this forest? I don't know. And he thought it would be ready to plow. And someone had to finally talk him down, like, do you know how valuable this is? You're going to be fairly wealthy. Every tree you cut off your land, you're going to be able to sell. And that's how it worked. But there was a problem. Along the southern shore in particular, it's very, very shallow a long way from the coast into Lake Michigan. So people adapted. They built these huge bridge piers out into the lake. The largest we know is just under 2,000 feet long. They went way out there. And when you read the newspaper accounts, that first year generally goes pretty well. And then the second year, they're like, yeah, we're going to make it longer. Because they always underestimated. Things are absolutely fine when the weather's great, not so fine when the storms roll in. So they're like, maybe deeper water. Maybe we'll just push it out just a little further to give us room. Didn't always work. So here's the otter at Whitefish Bay in some of its last moments. They got the crew off by shooting lines out on cannons and managed to kind of pull them in that way. But many a ship went down at these ports. If the lake bottom was sandy or silty, then the builders favored pile construction, and they'd use steam pile drivers to get it down. So this is one of the oldest pier we've documented to date in Door County. This is the original fishing pier at Whitefish Bay. How it gets its name was the export of whitefish from this structure. And you can see this if you go to the dock today and look down. You can see the first pilings when the sand is off them. They are right there because the modern dock is built right over this. Okay. If the lake bottom is rocky, however, then you obviously can't put in pilings. So people would do as the Luxembourger Pier Company did and put in cribs, filled in large part with stone from Door County. Okay. And you can see quite a bit of it still on the shore over at Toft Point, never shipped out. So this is Bailey's Harbor, their original pier, and you see it going way out there, and you can see the individual cribs underneath the decking and a couple of schooners parked at the far end loading lumber. Okay. Now on this side, where things drop off a little faster, the piers are a lot shorter, on the order of 100 feet, and people eventually favored this lovely stone construction, so almost like a jetty that you can walk out. And those piers seem to have survived a little bit longer, and I assume everyone recognizes this one. Okay. Okay. Absolutely love this one. I love seeing the intact buildings, besides the archaeology too. So timber is the reason that most of the piers existed. So white pine is favored for lumber, cedar made good fence posts, shingles and railroad ties, hemlock was harvested for railroad ties, but also for tanning bark and sent to Milwaukee to the big tanneries there and in Two Creeks in Manitowoc County. Hardwoods were cut into cordwood for fuel, for steamships and for the cities. And over the next few decades, Wisconsin's coastal forests were shipped south, acre by acre. Okay. And the scale of that trade is absolutely beyond comprehension. So I found this quote in a lumberman's article from 1866, written in Chicago. And so the receipt for the past 3 years, and remember, this is the beginning of the lumber trade. For the past 3 years, have composed entirely of boards a foot wide, would make a bridge to the moon with 40,000 miles to spare. So that was just Chicago, not Milwaukee, not Detroit, not Racine or Kenosha, just Chicago. That same writer calculated that the white pine brought into Chicago over the previous 10 years, before 1866, was enough to build a 2-story building 100 feet wide that would have stretched from Chicago to San Francisco, sufficient to house the entire population of Europe at the time. Wisconsin's total pine production from 1840 to 1873 was 86 billion board feet, which is enough to go around the earth 650 times. A lot of wood was moving across these ports. So cordwood, one favored product, obviously. This is what the Ronk brothers were selling. It was used to fuel cook stoves and boilers for steam engines, like the Corona on the Goodrich line. But they were also kind of like quick trips. Okay. They're bringing in manufactured goods. Okay. And you see here a couple advertisements for Ports Pier on the left, and over here Rogers, and I absolutely love Rogers' advertisement. I make a specialty of men's underwear, bought from the factory in eastern New York, which I am selling very low for cost or ready pay. And he talks about, oh, I've also got New York coffee too. You see, he had relatives in New York, so he had a little bit of an in compared to some of the other pier owners here. Okay. So these items were sold for cash, but if you were an immigrant, a settler clearing a farm, these people wanted the wood to sell, so you could bring it in the form of raw wood, or maybe you and the family would spend the entire winter making cedar shingles and package them up. You'd bring them in to the office at the pier store, and you could exchange it for these goods. So the communities are keeping the settlers afloat in their first few years as the farms are first being established. They're making sure that they're supplied. And in exchange, they're getting wood that they can then sell for a profit down in Chicago, Milwaukee, and Racine. Being sold at stores like this, again, this should be pretty familiar to each of you, the Anderson store, one of the few that survives today. Okay. And they all looked about like this, these little cute little whitewashed frame stores with a porch. Okay. Inside, they were absolutely packed. This is the only photograph I've found to date of the interior of one of the Lost Pier stores. This is the store in Carlton at Kewaunee County, also known as Dean's Pier. Okay. And everything but the kitchen sink. You can see horse tackle and blankets, the casks on the right. At least one of them contains molasses, and we know this because there was an article in the Kewaunee newspaper about someone being caught. He took a broom that was for sale, and when the storekeeper's back was turned, he dipped the handle of the broom into the molasses cask and was licking the molasses off, and they had to kick him out. So, anyway. But everything you needed, you could find there. The pier owners are also, many of them, employing their own lumberjacks. And they're bringing in huge quantities. So here's the woods. This is what they're after. Okay. Lumber camps are set up over the winter because this is when travel is easiest. The conditions are pretty brutal, but they are moving huge loads with horses, not oxen, horses, and so they need nice slippery ground to pull these sledges over. Okay. This is not OSHA recommended. Okay. Look where the driver is sitting. Okay. Yeah. There are lots of accounts in the newspapers of people falling off these, of the load shifting, of the horses just going crazy. As you can imagine, this is a hard life for a horse. Edward Decker, who owned one of the pier communities Langworthy in Kewaunee County, had his arm bitten off by a horse. Yeah, I didn't even know that could happen. I have never looked at a horse the same way again. Okay, yeah, so these are angry horses. Okay. They are hauling these incredibly heavy loads of lumber to the ports, often to a little sawmill set up next to the pier, or just inside in the interior. And at those locations, of course, it's sawed into lumber. And that supplies, again, the local community, the settlers as they're coming in, they want finished product as well. They can bring their product to the sawmill, or it can be shipped out for profit again. And all of this accumulates. So as you imagine load after load after load coming in the winter, and it's just building up because it can't go anywhere. There are no roads here, there are no railroads here that can get this product to the city, so it's all reliant on lake travel, and when the lakes are iced over, nothing's moving. So winter's hauling season, the Teamsters, they talk about traffic jams, just load after load after load after load. And it piles up. So Jacksonport, here's one of the lumber yards, and you see all sitting there waiting for the ice to break, waiting for those first lumber carriers to arrive. They tended to pick for ships older vessels. They're cheaper to buy. You don't have to put as much maintenance into them. Okay. The thought was you don't really have to maintain them because how can they sink? They're full of wood. Wood floats. So if they leak a little bit, it's okay. Wood can get wet. It's fine. Sailors called some of these, especially the older ones, floating coffins. Okay. Because every so often, one would just straight up sink. Just give up the ghost halfway between one port to the next and down it goes. Okay. So ships like, for example, the Jenny Bell. So you are among some of the first to see this. This is a brand new photogrammetry model of the schooner offshore here in Green Bay. Okay. The stern, you'll notice, has been pulled off. There was a very badly done salvage attempt in late 1960s, okay, that knocked the stern off, which from the archaeological point of view, I absolutely love because it gives you a perfect view of the cargo. So there's the cordwood all stacked inside, nice and neat. And that cordwood was harvested from Horseshoe Bay. And the accounts that, the research that was sent, they talk about how the loss of the ship, along with a couple of others that season, nearly bankrupted that pier owner and caused him a great deal of trouble. The ones that made it, however, would be taken into the southern cities, to Chicago, at that point the busiest port on earth, into Milwaukee, and then they would be loaded onto the railroads. And you'll notice in this shot right next to it, so, yeah, Milwaukee Railroad lumber yard. And I love this photo because the ship is just wallowing. So the cargo hold is full, it's stacked on the decks, and they tended to overload them just a little bit too. Okay. Yeah, okay. The more you could move, the more money you made. Okay. Yeah. So the ships, when they come north, are bringing people. This is settlement, this is colonization, huge pulses of immigration from Norway, from Bohemia, from Denmark, and these people are looking for cheap farmland. And so cutover land was a commodity. You could buy, sight unseen, a parcel with trees, or you could go cheap and buy the cutover land, and that got it off the tax rolls, so the pier owner did not have to pay taxes on it. They could make a little money in the sale. But of course, then the new arrivals are confronted with this. So, the Peshtigo fire is generally discussed as a great tragedy, and it certainly was. One of the most surprising things I found when doing the research was that 10 years, less than 10 years after this massive fire, the newspapers are describing it as the best thing that ever happened to this region, because it burned up the stumps. And it made the farmland that much easier to improve and cultivate for a little while. So the communities themselves, this is an idealized version. They're not cookie cutter. Each one is different than the last. Not everyone has every component. But in general, you have, of course, a pier of whatever length and configuration. You've got lumber yards along the shore, and generally any place anyone could fit lumber or wood, because they're bringing in a ton. You've got the pier store, the general store someplace, a boarding house, or a hotel, or workers' cabins of people that are living there. You've got support structures. There may or may not be a sawmill. There may or may not be a mill pond associated with that mill. And then workers' farms in the surrounding hinterland. There's generally a blacksmith someplace. There may be a wagon maker or another business. Most of the ports also had their own farm. This is where they're growing the oats and the hay to feed their horses and their livestock. It's where they're keeping some cows and pigs to make sure all their workers are fed. It's where the fresh vegetables are being grown. And if the wives of many of the owners and managers are raising chickens from time to time. We even have a few accounts of people making sugar. So I'm assuming raising beets. Okay. So thank you to Coastal Management Program. So as we've done our research, we realized every single one of these peer communities is telling a different variation of that story. Some of them amazing, some of them very boring, some of them shocking and boring. By the way, that's Higgins Pier, and I couldn't find anything interesting about Higgins Pier and Bailey's Harbor. I just couldn't. Just so dull. Anyway, almost everyone had some hook apart from that one. They're like, oh, this is interesting. This is kind of the heart of this community. So like I say, we'll go through 4 of them. Okay. So we'll start with Newport. This one's cinematic. You know, this one could be a movie very easily. So I'm kind of fond of Newport for that reason. And we are planning to feature Newport in our upcoming Wisconsin History Center, which will be opening in 2027. So we'll be featuring this community there to stand in for our ghost ports. Okay. So here it is, partially reconstructed. We don't have any maps of this community in its full height. So the arrangement of buildings is having to be inferred. Okay. So what is now Newport State Park, which is our dark sky park here in northern Door County, was founded in 1881 by a Teamster and Danish immigrant named Hans Johnson, who set up the pier. Okay. His first attempt was actually at Spider Island. He thought he could link Spider Island to the mainland, did not work. Okay. And then set up this location instead, a much better place. Okay. So Johnson raised enough money to start building his pier southeast of Europe Lake in late 1880, and then founded the community the next year. That first winter was very mild. He didn't have the lake ice he needed to build a good, solid pier crib system. So instead, he put the frames of the cribs together, okay, and kind of slid them out there and lashed a deck on top. So it was sort of floating and kind of being held down by its own weight. And that worked until November. At that point, a storm blew up, and he had 2 schooners loading the Forest and the R.H. Becker. And they all 3, the pier and both the 2 schooners, came onto the beach together. So they stayed there for a while. So this is the Becker in its later years. Johnson wound up kind of, making hay while the sun shone. He bought the Becker because it was cheap, because it was laying on this beach. And he managed to get it refitted with a new captain and got it back out on the lake. The owners of the forest managed to get it pulled off too. Just as they were about to give up on it, they managed to get it off. Johnson rebuilt the pier. He added cribstone the next winter when the ice did get thick enough, and managed to get the pier solidly in. And after that, he made a lot of money, and Newport grew up into one of the largest port communities on Lake Michigan. Between 300 and 500 people lived there at its peak. Okay. It was a nice little town. So this supposedly on the right, this is tentatively identified as Hans Johnson himself, standing out at the end of the pier. And you can see the pier, again, not overly OSHA approved. A little wavy, no guardrails whatsoever. We do have records of horses falling off the piers or getting spooked and running off them with wagons attached. And you're looking down the length of it. You notice, though, it gets wider on the end. This is a turnaround and staging area. This one, the horses come out, you can at least get them in the wagons turned around without them falling in. It's also a good platform to store materials. When this pier was destroyed the first time, it is mentioned that he had several casks of pork and beef that he intended to feed his lumberjacks with, and he had to go find new after the pier was destroyed on round one. Okay. But you can see in the distance piles of lumber and buildings. So that was Newport. Right at the base of the pier was the store and post office. And again, you can see that same nice whitewashed frame configuration with the porch. And notice that there's lumber and wood laying everywhere. Okay, we're going to go back to this. So lumber yards either side, the post office and the store right at the base of the pier. The sawmill would eventually go just off screen to the right. Okay. And if you go to this location today, not a trace of it. Not a bit. Yep, they've kept it open. If you know what you're looking for on the beach, you can see bits and pieces left behind, a square nail, a little bit of crockery, maybe part of a crib of a pier that's washed in. But other than that, you wouldn't know unless you knew. There's a little historic kiosk that's been added right to the middle with pictures, some of these photographs and a little history of the community. Okay. So in 1888, Newport, and you can see their timberlands extend all the way up to Europe Bay. So they've bought as much cheap timberland as they can to log off and to supply themselves. So they are joined by an individual named Peter Knudsen, and he is a fellow Danish immigrant and from a family of lighthouse keepers. Okay. So Peter worked on Pilot Island, Plum Island, Chambers Island. He manned the Peshtigo lightship stationed offshore for quite a while. And at some point, the U.S. government decided that it was kind of silly to have people stay out on the lighthouses and light stations all winter because nobody's moving. So they should be allowed to come to the mainland where there are other people and they're not going to go crazy. So Peter and his family wind up at Newport, and they meet Hans Johnson. And at some point, Knudsen decides that he wants in on this. So he winds up buying a half interest in Newport. Okay. At the same time, Johnson decided he would run for political office. And he won a position as a state legislator, went down to Madison, was there for maybe a quarter of a term, decided it was boring and stupid, and came back. Okay. They basically said, yeah, we're going to release you. Because he sent a couple notices back that said they work for like an hour a day. I don't understand. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So their partnership lasted about 4 years. And this is where the cinematic, dramatic aspect comes in. You think this is a community that has everything going for it. It has a very charismatic, politically savvy, very driven original owner who's worked his way up again from Teamster to being called Governor Johnson. You've got Knudsen from a prominent family, and then these cracks start to emerge, and it's just a hint here and a hint there in the records. Okay. So the individual on the left is a Milwaukee lumber dealer named Theodore Plathner. He was one of Johnson's main customers. He was the original owner of the Becker, the person who sold that ship to Johnson very cheap. Okay. He had an interest in most of the ports up here at one time or another. He was a huge customer for Door County. He also would extend credit. So in 1895, Johnson withdraws from the firm. So the census records from around that period have him living as a boarder, not in his own home, but as a boarder with a couple of other Newport residents. Like, okay, that's odd. There's no explanation for it. He still has a farm. Okay. We know he has a farm. Okay. When Johnson withdraws, Plathner comes up here to help with the dissolution of the firm, which, again, this is a little unusual. And Plathner offers Johnson a job in Michigan at a lumber camp. And Johnson agrees, and he goes off, and there are poems written in his honor in the newspapers. There's this massive goodbye to somebody who's very well liked. And off he goes, and Knudsen takes over Newport in its entirety, and within a year, Johnson's back. And he said, well, there wasn't much to do over there. Like, now that's odd, because we did research, and that lumber camp kept going for quite a long time. So that didn't make sense either. The next thing you see, 1898, creditors foreclose on Johnson's farm. Plathner buys it and lets Johnson stay on as a tenant. You get the sense that this guy is doing everything he can to help this individual through something. Johnson eventually moves on. He runs for local office. He gets a position as town treasurer and takes a job at a hardware store in Sister Bay. Okay. And then this appears in the newspapers. Okay. March 28th, 1905, Johnson was supposed to turn in the tax receipts for his office, and he didn't have the money. And he was caught just before he actually stepped off a pile. He was on a pile of agricultural equipment. Someone walked into the warehouse, saw him, and managed to grab him. And you think, all right, the newspapers for a few weeks after that is, can we get the money back? Thousands of dollars are gone. And they realize, no, we're never going to see this again. There's no explanation for what happened. And as I'm researching, I'm like, okay, the next thing is going to be Johnson's trial. There was never a trial. He was never incarcerated. There was just a simple thing that said he is being taken back to his farm and provided with equipment so he can farm and try and pay us back. And if anyone had really been following him closely, this would not have been a surprise. A few weeks after that, there's a mention that Johnson has contracted tuberculosis. He sticks on with the farm for a little while, and Plathner dies. His landlord is now dead. Former employees, former Teamsters at Newport managed to find him a job at another lumber camp in Michigan, and this is where he winds up. He passes away there in 1912, and there's a single line in the newspaper at that point that says, someone fitting Johnson's description is reported dead. So he goes from a Teamster to the governor of Newport, state legislator, right down. And this is one of the things about these communities is they're mysteries. I would love to know what happened. Was it an illness? Was it alcoholism? Did he just straight up lose it? Who knows? But what is clear is that the surrounding community cared very much for this individual, and they weren't blaming him to the point that they wanted to see him suffer for it. They just ate the loss, tried to help him, and moved on. Now, Knudsen, for his part, is still in charge of Newport. And so here's Newport's pier. You've got some horses cooling their feet in the lake. And then you see the cribs, a couple folks out on the pier, and then a ton of lumber parked out on that staging area with the steamship picking it up. Knudsen, when he comes on, he tries to keep things going, but at that point, actually, he came in at the worst possible time into sole ownership. The lumber boom was dying. They were running out of easy timber at that point. So he just wasn't making the money he wanted to. So he went back to lighthouse keeping for a little bit. He tried his hand as a fisherman. It was enough to keep the family going, but Newport itself began, person after person moving away to better prospects. And the community starts to slowly fade and die at that point. And then there's the seeming bit of hope that comes in. An individual named E. Gall, who comes in and buys the whole area, everything from Newport up to Europe Lake. And it's going to be great because E. Gall is going to build a railroad, an electric rail line through northern Door County from Sturgeon Bay, ending in Newport. And that's going to bring tourists. At this point, Door County is just beginning to be known as a destination for summer people. Eagle brings shiploads of people in from the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and they're given the circle tour of the peninsula. People are greeting them with bouquets and feasts and banquets. Oh, rich people, look at our cherries. Look at our, at our shoreline. We can host you. You can build summer houses here and give us money, money, money. And it looks like this huge investment is about to arrive, and I absolutely felt, so this is one of their advertisements that they put in. I absolutely adore this. The California of the North. Location of the largest cherry orchard in the world, new gasoline electric line to run through Door County, third famous cow in the world. Okay. Now, who's keeping track of that, and what's, this is another one of the mysteries. I want that solved. Okay. So Eagle. So Eagle actually begins work on a summer cabin near Europe Lake. He comes with his family to spend the summer with the Knutson family. They agree to stay on as caretakers for the property. And then Peter Knutson, it's kind of probably hard to see, files this plat with the county for a new town called Newport. I mean, named streets, city blocks, they're planning on this being the terminus for this railroad, and they're going to sell these. It's going to be awesome. You can see the pier, I've circled the pier there. And this is huge. Okay. So this is, I've kind of superimposed it on the landscape today. So this would take in most of the shoreline of Newport down to Duck Bay. Okay. And then there's this odd little article that after only a couple of weeks, really, E. Gall is bundled into the brand new motor car that Knudsen has bought. It's a nice little fancy roadster because he's going to be taking, very rich people around in style. And suddenly they're all rushing back to Sturgeon Bay through the middle of a thunderstorm. I'm like, well, that's odd. Why did they cut their vacation so short? Okay. Oh, something that happened just a couple of days earlier. They got word that Archduke Ferdinand had been assassinated in Europe, and World War I was on. And that caused a massive financial upheaval, and the Gall Company went bankrupt, or very nearly so. So they were rushing home. Okay. The next thing they know, the office in Sturgeon Bay is closed, no one's answering the door, everyone's freaking out, but what about our railroad? Knudsen makes one last trip to Minneapolis because the payments for his land are not coming. Realizes they're never going to, and he forecloses. So now he's stuck with the land again. The following year, he goes to Sturgeon Bay, he withdraws the town plat. And so that was the end of the city of Newport. So after many years of trying to find another buyer, he finally does, and this individual walking away from the camera on the beach is Ferdinand Hotz, a Chicago jeweler who winds up buying quite a bit of land up in northern Door County. And so he buys the whole tract, puts in a huge cabin on Europe Lake for himself, sells a little bit here and there for summer cabins for friends. And so they see the sawmill at this point. Okay. He eventually moves that because it's blocking the view of the shore. Moves inland for a little bit, and then that's pretty much it for Newport. The post office and store, you see far left, they become used as a farmhouse. So the last little bit of life there. And we've got an aerial photo. You can just see the little farmstead at the heart, and then the ruins of the pier, the cribs extending out into the lake. So we did some ground penetrating radar. Found, looks like the location of some of these buildings. Again, we're finding some artifacts. We think it's probably coming off the post office store location. Underwater, however, much better luck. So those cribs are still down there, at least partially, and some of them are absolutely gorgeous. And shallow, too, I might add. You see that the iron fasteners holding the timbers together, shallow enough that one of our volunteers was able just to snorkel and take measurements as he went. So if you know where you're looking for, you've got a kayak or a shallow boat, and you want to get out there a little bit, you can see what's left of Johnson's Pier, just offshore. All right, so we'll slip down now to Rowley's Bay and Appleport. Okay, so Rowley's Bay first. So the 1899 plat map of Door County shows these, but it only ever throws in a couple of buildings. It never shows every cabin, which drives me nuts. But you can see, same thing. There's the post office and the store. They've got their little sawmill. There are a couple other buildings shown. That's probably the manager's house or the Rogers house, and a place for his father-in-law, Dr. Blawis. So the only one of the ports I found that actually had on-site medical help, and he assisted with a large region. As you imagine, sawmill accidents, lumbering accidents, horses, he was very busy. Now Rowley's Bay gets its start early on 1860s. Elias Gill, who then goes on to found Gill's Rock, is the first to put a pier in and ship lumber out of this area. It's then picked up by a firm with Lewis Osborne, John Osgood, and Anaximander Cogswell. I love this name. And these are actually Hans Johnson's first employers. So when he's working as a teamster, he's working for this bunch at Rowley's. They sell out in the 1870s. They take the easiest pickings and then sell out to go work someplace else. And it's bought by an individual named Samuel A. Rogers. And see, he winds up in possession of most of the land around the bay. And this is different timberland. This is lower, it's swampier, it's a lot more cedar. So much more difficult to work in because of the terrain, but higher value for the product. Okay. As you see, it's a very shallow bay, and yeah, just moving around it was difficult. So Rogers decided that he would solve that by putting in multiple piers. And we found traces in the archival records of 5. So you've got the main pier where the Rowley's Bay Resort is or was, south, another one to the south, one at the mouth of the Mink River, one at the end of Juice Mill Road. This has served a cedar oil mill for a while. And then there's mention of a wharf on the east side of the bay someplace. Okay. And he bought the hull of a ship and turned it into a little steam barge, so he would have people bring their product to these individual piers. It's easier in moving them around, and he'd pick them up and he'd ship them back to the main pier for staging and shipping south at that point. And he had, of course, his own sawmill. So he was one of the few in that area that's able to produce milled lumber. Okay. And again, people from Newport are coming across the ice to get milled lumber because they didn't have a sawmill at the time, and then taking it back. They specialized in cedar products, including the shingles. And so this was on display at Rowley's Bay for quite a while. And you see still stamped with his name and with the grade. He did very fine cedar shingles. But he wound up, after, as you might imagine, he had a ton of land that got cut over and he didn't want it anymore. He wanted it off the taxes. So he began selling out. So some went to the juice mill, to the cedar oil people, and then he sold a great big chunk on the north shore just east of the mouth of the Mink River to an individual who wanted to develop it, put in a big summer resort property. Again, this is the beginnings, the hint of the tourism industry, and this person's like, it's going to be awesome. He had this lithograph made showing hotels and streets and fountains and parks and people playing and skating and boating, hotel, all the amenities, this amazing town. And they took that and then the plat. And plat went to the county and to the town, and they subdivided it and said, okay, we now have a few hundred individual taxable parcels. And the individual went down to Chicago and began selling. And it became clear pretty quickly that these people had no idea that they were buying swampland, that this lithograph was not real. people began sending letters. When can I take possession of the hotel I just bought? And like, there is no hotel up here. And of course, as people realized they bought swampland, they're not inclined to pay taxes on it. But the town was on the hook financially for advertising every delinquent property. They started looking at the printing costs and realizing this is going to cost them thousands of dollars. And it began this massive legal scramble. Can we buy back? Can we even find the owners for half of this? Some of them are being sold multiple times. What do we do? You know, the development as a whole is being passed from person to person, and every single one is, oh, we swear we're going to do it. We're really going to put it together. You'll get your money. They never did. So that would have been Tacoma Beach. And the little snippets, I've got just a few here, you know, whether the expectations will be realized, it's decidedly problematical. Another reporter said all you needed to sell a lot at Tacoma Beach was a plat of the property, a glib tongue, and an elastic conscience. Okay. And then near the end, there's kind of this summary of when they finally got possession of all this back and turned it into one thing and got off the financial hook. So we will not linger over the gnashing of teeth or the bitter recriminations. The lots were sold and the lithographs used up, so he merely shrugged his shoulders and turned his thoughts to other things, and so after a while did the dupes. And Rogers sitting right next to it. It's like, we don't think anyone blamed him. He does wind up in the papers once getting in trouble for poaching land off of the Tacoma Beach property, because I'm sure he thought, well, it used to be mine and nobody's using it, so I'll just take a few more trees. Anyway. The same thing happens here as it happens at Newport. The trees are eventually harvested out. There's not that much income coming in. The land is already settled and divided up. So everything is allowed to kind of go into ruin. So this photograph used to hang in the Rowley's Bay Resort. And you can see disturbed ground where the sawmill had been. Again, disturbed remnants of the foundation over at the store and post office. And then a couple of cribs visible off the dock. And then you see another smaller dock up north. So where the farmstead goes, that's where the resort eventually went in. So when we were there, didn't find anything intact of this pier. Okay. We know there are remnants, of course, of the store and the sawmill on shore. They'd already been documented, actually. What we did find is that when the channel was dredged on the north side of this pier, they went through the old dock and they destroyed the cribs. So the timbers have all been blown apart and are kind of rolling around on the bottom of Rowley's Bay. So this map is probably not accurate anymore because the weather has rolled them around and moved them. But if you dive down, you can still see, you know, the working and how they were fastened together. Okay. Now, when our divers were out at Rowley's Bay, they were keeping their eyes open for a ship. So we had multiple accounts of a shipwreck in the bay, this very, very shallow bay, a ship called the Emma Layton. And people had been looking for that forever, and not a trace of it, and our divers couldn't find it either. And I'm like, where is this wreck? It is mentioned in one of those advertisements as wrecking at Porth's Pier, and that was confusing us as well because Rogers owned it for most of its service. He definitely owned Rowley's Bay while the Emma Layton was in service. And like, so where does Porth come in? Was there another pier? Did he own one of the secondary piers? What's going on? Finally realized that the answer was hiding absolutely in plain sight. Appleport is not really in Rowley's Bay. It's south of. Okay. So it sank in 1885. Okay. But you'll note on the advertisements, Porth's Pier, Rowley's Bay. And so that was what had everyone confused. It wasn't really at Rowley's Bay. It was south of Rowley's Bay. So down there's Appleport. Okay. And how do we know? Okay, here again, another mention of Rowley's Bay. So Master George C. Thompson in Milwaukee made short work of the Rowley Bay Pier when he smashed his vessel into it while attempting to dock. Helped by strong east-northeast winds, the schooner dislodged 7 massive cribs. Now think about that. That had to have been a heck of a noise. And I doubt there was very little left of the Emma Layton on the other side. So unlike this poor schooner, which ended her service that fateful day, the pier was repaired. So it turns out Appleport isn't Appleport, it's Appel, the first owner and pier builder, and Porth the second owner and builder. Oop. Okay. So there's Axel Appel himself. Nothing to do with trees or orchards or ports at all. It's just their two names squashed together. So this is Port's Pier. And we had been contacted when we sent out letters and said, we're coming to your location, we're going to be offshore, don't panic, we'll have divers in the water, and we may be on the beach, but we're not going to come onto your property. And then one of the property owners sent us this picture, so Mr. Mielke, and he said, well, we have this. And you can see the larger crib, so that's what's left of the original pier. And then the Larson family wind up purchasing this, and they used it as the basis for a fishing fleet. So you're looking at their fish shack there. And so they kind of rebuilt a small pier on top of the old, larger pier. We're like, okay, this is awesome. So we were investigating that, and another neighbor came out. And she said, oh, are you looking for the schooner? Like, what schooner? She said, well, if you walk that direction, and it was very shallow, if you walk that direction, you'll come across part of an old ship. She said, I've been thinking about bringing it in and making a kitchen table out of it. No. Okay. So we followed her directions and fetched up right on the centerboard of the Emma Layton. Okay. So there it is. And about the time we were wandering around, so our divers are way offshore. No. The individual whose legs you see there and myself, we were supposed to be onshore running a survey equipment. And when she said, when you walk out there, I'm like, well, I don't ever get the chance to find a shipwreck. So, splash, 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 splash. And because up to our waist. And like, sure enough, here it is. And right as we're doing that, I'm holding the walkie-talkie, and then I hear, hey, we're finding shipwreck parts out here. And so bits and pieces of rigging, fasteners, over actually probably where it struck the pier. And so as far as we can tell, it left a trail of bits, all the way across that area as it came through. One of them caught the attention of one of our volunteers, and he about lost his mind. This is part of a steam engine. This would have been for a small portable engine, the kind that would have been used to run agricultural equipment or potentially a sawmill, a small portable mill. And so he's been doing research on this part, is very, very enthusiastic about it. Okay. So we don't know if that was on board the ship or if it was on the pier when the pier came down. Okay. Okay. So we'll jump down a little bit. Mud Bay, Toft Point. This one is a little bit different. This is the last I'll talk about tonight. It's a little strange because this one wasn't a lumber port. So Toft Point was the location of the Mud Bay Limestone Quarry, so operated by a group called Buckley and Wing Limestone Quarry of Manistee, Michigan. And they used Toft Point as a source for limestone and dolomite that was then shipped over to Manistee and fed into lime kilns there, so starting in 1869. The company had some financial issues. They wound up going into foreclosure as creditors came across them. The workers, including the manager, a man named Thomas Toft, sued the crap out of them for back wages. It's just lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. You owe us money, you owe us money, you owe us money. The firm eventually squeaks through, but barely. And in the middle of all the lawsuits, they sent a ship over to load stone. This is while the Toft property had been seized for money owed. And some locals saw them, probably Toft himself, and tipped off the local sheriff. And the sheriff got a group of people together, and they showed up on the beach and said, you're going to put that stone right back. And there was a little bit of a fight, but eventually the stone went back on the beach. And the newspaper article said, we sent them back to Michigan, convinced there was such a thing as a law in Door County. Which I always like that. So this one was set up just a little bit differently. There was no pier store here. There was a large boarding house. There were workers' cabins for families. They're just off the map on the south here. They'd be just out of frame. Okay. You had the quarry itself. And then the dock, instead of a great big pier, was a massive stone wharf with timbers intermixed with it because, of course, very heavy material is being moved back and forth over it, and it had to stand up to that. The Toft family put in a lime kiln of their own, The family lore had that this was only used twice because it didn't really work, but still there when you visit Toft Point. The quarry walls are absolutely visible. You can walk around the old quarry. Okay. And my favorite thing, because archaeologists get excited, let me see if I can get this to work. There we go. This great big pile of stone. This is quarried and piled ready to be shipped. And never was. So quarry went out of operation before this could be taken to the beach. So the Toft family descendants have happily they were loaned us this photograph. So this is the boarding house. After the quarry kind of shut down, Thomas Toft, the manager, eventually gets it. He runs the quarry for himself for a little while after Buckling and Wing pull out. When the quarry shuts down, he turns this into his family home. So the Toft children are raised here. And this is Emma Toft, one of his daughters out front. Okay. If you go there today, this building is not there, but you can see its foundation. So the stairs and some of the plumbing to either side. Okay. That flagpole has since fallen since we were there. Okay. On the beach, I think some of this might be some of the stone that they forced Buckling Wing to throw back. And then, so our maps. You can actually see, if you look at Google Maps on aerial photos, you can see the dock just under the surface of the water. Okay, and it has its own shipwreck, in this case, the Ebenezer. So the story goes that the Ebenezer pulled up and docked loaded stone and was sitting in Mud Bay next to the quarry when the captain came off on the ship's boat, came ashore and said they were very low in crew. And he was going to go a couple miles into Bailey's Harbor and see if he couldn't get anyone to sign on to crew the vessel on their trip over. And he was just going to be gone a little while. While the Ebenezer, however, was in Mud Bay, a little storm called the Alpino Blow came in. This is a very famous, very destructive storm. There are reports of the water level in Sturgeon Bay dropping 2 feet as the storm surge moved. This was a massive thing, and it devastated shipping and piers all up and down the Lake Michigan coastline. So the ships were running for cover, including coming into Mud Bay, any place they could find at least a little bit of shelter. So the family lore for the Toft family said that the only person left on board the Ebenezer was the ship's cook, and he panicked. Let out too much anchor chain, and that let the ship drift over into the pier. And again, this pier is made out of stone, and the ship is full of stone. So the ship full of stone starts hitting the pier made out of stone, and so when the captain comes back, he sees this. And so that was it for the Ebenezer. Again, the family lore has the ship's captain being very mad at that point. A couple of other ships grounded but were pulled out of Mud Bay. There. So the Ebenezer on its side, it has since broken apart, and you can see the fragments of this wreck scattered. It's kind of moved around both sides of the pier itself. If you continue walking in the woods, though, you find some other things that don't really have anything to do with this as an active export point. Thomas Toft, as he ages, eventually moves his family into Bailey's Harbor. There is a lawsuit that arises over the timber, because this is not a lumber port. Toft was not interested in cutting the timber off the property. In fact, he wanted to keep it. He and his wife, Julianne, were preservationists and conservationists well ahead of their time. The Toft family history, they talk about how when the local cook decided she wanted to make frog legs, Julianne sent her kids out to scare all the frogs away, to save them, So all the children, all the siblings get this conservationist ethic. And in the meantime, Moses Kilgore, one of the pier owners in Bailey's Harbor, all their neighbors are eyeing that timber, and they're thinking, what are they doing? What a waste. This is money. And so the property lines start moving a little back and forth, and Toft is running people off, and it winds up in the courts. And it goes on so long that the parcel of land becomes known as the Fighting 40. Everyone's fighting over this timber. And Toff suffers a fatal stroke in Bailey's Harbor. The family always said due to the stress of this. But that left, it took a little heat off the family because everyone's like, they've suffered enough, and pulled back a little bit. But it also left them like, okay, what do we do? How do we make money? How do we support ourselves? And Julianne has this idea. This is 1919, and she's looking around at everything else going on, and she's like, well, there is another renewable resource we could turn to. Those folks from Chicago. What if we turn this into a resort? So the Toft Point Resort, they switch their family home back into a lodge, to a boarding house. They build some very small cabins. They put up this ice house. You notice it has no roof because it never did. This was so they could pile sawdust on top of the ice and let the water soak it and keep it insulated. Built these little cabins. And it was rustic. I've been in one of the cabins. There's enough room barely to turn around and lie down. That's about it. No running water. But the family would cook the fish you caught. Emma Toft was famous for her pies and for cedar plank salmon brought out of the lake. And by all accounts, it was a fantastic place to be. But because it was never logged, it's also one of the most beautiful places. Some of the last old-growth, original, timberland left in Door County. And then she and the siblings, of course, get it set aside as conservation land along with the Ridges Sanctuary next door. So that is Toft Point. And this is what happens eventually. Yeah, if you know where that is, I really need to know.
It might be Scott's here.
Might be Scott. This is, okay. Yeah, Ferdinand Hotz's photo collection. It is not identified as to the location.
It's Dan Kohler's son, or Ernest Dan Kohler's son. It's a picture that came from the Dan Kohler collection
Okay.
at the Door County.
There, okay. All right. All right, Scott, which we could find no trace of, by the way.
Scott's here, or it would be possibly in Clay Banks.
Okay.
Sturgeon Bay.
Near the, okay, southern. Okay. Thank you. That's the one mystery solved. I know we're going to find some great stuff up here. All right, so this is what happens eventually to all of them. Once they're abandoned, they're not being kept up, and the lake ice and the waves and nature takes them plank by plank and crib by crib. But again, like I said, if you go out to Newport, you can find bits of the cribbing on shore, half sticking out of the sand. This is how we found Ronk's Pier. So going right back to the original survey, we never found any intact traces of the pier offshore, but we found parts of it onshore. And so Jonathan Ronk and David Hearn, the current descendants of Paul and Nicholas Ronk, we were able to clear off some of that cribbing, some of the decking, and they were able to sit in exactly the same positions as their ancestors in that first photo I showed you, and we took some pictures of them, and they were oh so happy. But eventually they fade out. And as the buildings come down, some are relocated, some burn, some are just fall to pieces. In many cases, all you have is a road that might have an odd name attached to it, like Sandy Bay Road or Nordheim Road. And that's about the only trace left. And in the case of Ronksville, we found it on one map from 1866, done by the U.S. Army when they were charting out the coastline to see where harbors could go. That was it. So almost completely lost if it had not been for family memory. So with that, huge long list of people to thank, all the way up and down, including Coastal Management, who helped fund the project, and I hope will be able to fund us in the future. And thank you oh so much for having me here to talk about it. Okay, thanks.
Do we have time for a few questions? Yes, sir.
So, is Wisconsin noticeably different than the other Great Lakes regions as far as deforesting and then turning it into farmland?
It was going on in Michigan. Okay, and there are ghost ports that we're seeing mention of in Michigan as well, and I would love to get somebody on their side of the lake to pick this up. So it was happening. Okay. How far inland it goes in Michigan, I'm not sure. Obviously, it's not affecting the Upper Peninsula too much, but on lower, it should be doing some of the same things. Okay. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
When was the Alpena blow?
Oh, 1880. When was the Alpena blow? And I should know that. For some reason, 85 is coming into my head, but that's probably not right. It's somewhere between 80 and 85.
Was that the blow that destroyed that schooner?
The Ebenezer, yes. Yep. And I want to say that's the same one that took out the Emma Layton. But I'll double check. Okay, when you read the newspaper accounts, like it's full page spreads, and it just lists ship after ship after ship after ship. Okay. Yes?
So are you working your way down the Lake Michigan side, or when do you go over to the Green Bay side?
Well, if things go well and funding continues to flow, this week we're actually supposed to be in Washington Island, but with the funding freeze, that's been postponed till next year. So, we have heard that funding may be arriving. So, crossing fingers on that. If that grant program continues, or if we can find another donor or funding source, the next step would have been this side. Okay. And so we were already picking targets. And I'm hoping that we can do that, even if it's maybe not all in one go, but maybe one here, one there, as we're working on other things. Because we do want to keep this going and eventually work our way then up the other side on the Marinette County. And then we'll have done the lakeshore. Yeah.
So you've done Bailey's.
Bailey's Harbor. We didn't do the harbor itself, so we were focusing on the ones that are definitely not there. The only, I'd say, exception to that was Whitefish Bay, and we threw that in because people said, hey, the sand moved, and suddenly these two piers have appeared. You are like, well, we're here. Let's do it. So, and plus, we've been looking for shipwrecks. Now, we have another individual, Russell Leitz, who's been writing an in-depth history of Bailey's Harbor, so he's taking care of that aspect of it for us.
And where will that come out? Have you published?
That will be coming out through the Wisconsin Underwater Archaeology Association, and so actually you'll be seeing him in a few weeks because he's getting an award for this work. WUA tends to make their stuff publicly available. It's one of the reasons we didn't do the Clay Banks Township, because if you look online, WUA has already done that set of piers. Okay.
I didn't see anything about Boost Point on your map. That was going to be a big
Boost. We walked over to Booze. We got excited until we took a good look at the fasteners on the piers that are there. I'm like, oh, this is a modern one. Didn't see anything around it. Not much was showing up archival, except for a very interesting account of people abandoning that community because of a ghost. And I think Booze Point, no, that's spelled differently. But yeah, accounts of like lumber sleds coming through with snow white horses, except there's no place for them to turn around, and there's no tracks, and people getting freaked out at lights and abandoning it suddenly. And I don't know how much of this is true at all, but it's intriguing. But we couldn't find any traces, at least in the water, of that community. Now, one hasn't come up. I mean, one of the problems that we have is they will appear as, Taylor's Pier or Hibbert's Pier and Anderson's Pier, and sometimes these people own multiple piers. Or it would be one person, and then they'd sell it to be another person again. And unless somebody says this pier so many miles from, it's hard to get them. And Door County's plat map, again, is so late. We're not picking up the early ones, but the 1866 Lakeshore Survey is so early, it's not picking them up either. So Door County is in kind of an archival gap. So I think archaeology is about the only way we're going to be able to solve. So if you think there are bits of pier out there, we can certainly go look. Yeah.
Again, I haven't scoured it with the scuba tank, snorkeling. I could not say with any certainty there's any kind of crypt out
Yeah.
that way. So that's why I don't know if there really was, but there's a building, a structure on Highway 57 that was supposed to be kind of a tavern for the loggers.
Okay.
It's called the Heidelberg House now. But that was supposedly had history going back. And that's why there was a pier out that
And that makes sense. We're also seeing that quite a few of the piers in Door County were very short-lived. You know, they'd be put out, take out the timber real quick, and then out. There's one that you can see when you go to Duck Bay, south of the Newport swimming beach. And you can see the crib sticking out of the water. I haven't had a chance to see it up close because every time I've been there, the cladophora and toxic algae has been about 3 feet thick. And I'd like to live. But, there are maybe 2 accounts of that. And it seems like it was just a few families would go there in the winter, log a little, ship a little. I don't know how it's so shallow, but they'd get some of it out somehow and make a little bit of money, and then it was abandoned. Okay. Yeah.
Could it be one of the 3 Jacksonport piers?
No, the 3 Jacksonport piers they were right off of Jacksonport. They are all on the National Register of Historic Places, owned by 3 people, including close family members who absolutely hated each other. So yeah, they were all in operation right together, right at the same time. Yeah. Where are the who? The black dot. The black dots represent places on the plat map where the roads go straight to the shore. But there's no indication of a pier. So these are locations we think are likely pier spots, but we haven't been able to put a name on them. We haven't been able to confirm one way or the other. We haven't visited them in person. So those are spots that we need to follow up on. Yes?
Roughly, when you say they were short, some of them were short-lived. Roughly how long? From when we started logging and now we're abandoning the pier?
The shorter-lived ones are going to be 10 years or under. Okay. The longer-lived ones could make it 30 years, maybe a little longer, but not much more. Yep.
Did you say there was a pier in North Bay?
North Bay, I'm coming across mentions of it. So-and-so is shipping from North Bay, or they talk about a ship loading at North Bay, and like, okay, so we need to follow up on that too. Okay. The problem is it really depends on who's writing the newspaper accounts. And some areas just get overlooked. If you want to read about the piers of Kewaunee County, we have completely finished that report. It is available online if you go to wisconsinshiprocks.org. There's a tab called Research, and you can find every research report our divers have ever done, including the Kewaunee County report there. And you'll notice that the chapter on Carlton is massive. That is because next door was the newspaper correspondent. And he could have given Mark Twain a run for his money. He was hysterical. So we have a huge history of Carlton for exactly that region, but not far north is a little place run by one individual, and we know next to nothing about it. It appears on some maps, but nobody ever thought, let's write about Henry Grimm and Grimm's Pier. We just have a couple of mentions, and that's it. But the most notable thing that ever made it into the papers was the time a horse got spooked and ran all the way off the end of the pier. Mm-hmm. No, that is a little pier that is jutting out of land that is owned by the Cream City Brick Company. So we think they may have owned some timberland themselves, maybe to bring in fuel for the brick kilns.
That looks right at the spot where Hughes Point.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
So how about Washer Bay? How many confirmed piers have you found there?
We haven't found anything. So the research, because we haven't been there yet. So the research that they've for the Egg Harbor has done is they've transcribed every mention. And having done this is an incredible amount of work. They have transcribed every mention of Horseshoe Bay that they could find in the Door County Advocate and other papers. And as I'm skimming through, and this is something I would have to really sit down with, you see names coming and going, but there are also mentions of the old pier, the new pier, a pier being north of a former location. So that's going to be one of these where I'm going to have to do basically a murder board and say, okay, this person in that spot and here, and okay, this land ownership, and try and figure it out, but we're not there yet. Okay. Okay. So thank you.
Well,